This is the Depth Mystic Community Podcast, episode 38, a weekly podcast featuring Jungian Depth Mystic Zach Tolan, podcast host Zach Tolan, and occasionally, if he ever does anything and decides to show up sometimes, promotional manager Zach Tolan. So, Jungian Depth Mystic Zach Tolan, how was your week? Oh, it's been pretty good. I'm undergoing some changes, and I think that provokes the topic that we wanted to cover this week. I think you're right. So, the topic at hand is the Greek word Kenosis. What does that bring to mind when I say that? Jungian Depth Mystic Zach Tolan. Well, that's the word that St. Paul of Tarsus used to describe what Jesus of Nazareth had to do in order to achieve the goal which the Christians all believe he achieved. Okay, but what does it mean? What does kenosis mean? I'm not a PhD level expert in ancient Greek, but to the best of my understanding, it means emptying. So Jesus had to empty himself. I guess one way of looking at it is like in sports, when you give it your all, it's time to give it your all. It means go so far as to, risk injury or put on a performance that you might not be able to replicate. To empty yourself in the performance of whatever it is that you're doing. That is a really interesting topic. What do you think provoked us to cover that topic this week? Right now in my own life, as a depth mystic, I'm adding a new element to our ministry. And it requires precisely this kind of emptying that Paul says was required of Jesus in order to accomplish his goal. Well, but it's obviously not in exactly the same way that Jesus had to empty himself, right? He ended up dying. Yeah. So I've had, what's called a spiritual ego death. I've undergone what can be understood as a psychological equivalent of death. The same way near-death experiencers have that type of thing. You enter into this zone where your life becomes relative. You end up bearing witness to your own existence. Instead of just living your life and trying to do the best you can from within yourself, you have like an out-of-body experience or something that allows you to see yourself from the point of view of the objective world. The world that may or may not even care about you. But you can see yourself completely from that point of view. Okay, that's pretty cool. And I guess we're going to try to connect this idea of kenosis or emptying to that. Well, no, I just wanted to say that I have undergone my own type of death experience around the age of 20. And it was a kind of emptying at that point. But it's a little different from the emptying I'm undergoing now because I'm in a different phase of the journey. I mean, the first emptying was brought up in relation to what Paul says Jesus did on the cross. And we kind of understand what he meant. Jesus is crying out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It's like we see a person who has given it his all. And Jesus actually died and was said to have resurrected. And I actually had that happen to me when I was 20 years old. Okay, yeah, I guess you're a pretty advanced mystic if you're not even talking about your own near-death experience in reference to this particular instance of kenosis or this idea of spiritual emptying. I mean, you already emptied yourself once, right? So the fact that you would have to be doing it again, you couldn't really get much more dramatic than ego death, right? That's probably the most dramatic possible experience, for a person in a spiritual sense. So maybe you're talking about it in like some other sense, right? Yeah, this time around, I'm finally reconciling with something that I've brought up before, which is that for the longest time, I have known that it's part of my mission to make this video game that I talk about once in a while. And I finally realized it's time to do that now. I have no other way forward in terms of the ministry that I'm doing. No other way forward? Well, what about our brilliant podcast? How is that not a way forward? The podcast is what it is. I think we can both be pretty proud of the fact that we're doing it weekly and there's no plan on stopping that. But, who knows what kind of momentum the podcast is ever going to have with the actual public. We can't predict that. And I do feel like I'm never going to feel good about myself if I don't actually finish this video game or just work on it completely. So I've finally decided to fully commit myself to making this video game. And the prerequisite of that is fully committing myself to being an artist. Like, we've been a mystic and we've found an identity and we have a podcast to show for it. But now this other calling that has been here for a very long time is something I have to fully embrace as well. And so I have to empty myself. I have to empty myself into the dimensions of that role as an artist, as all great artists do. One of the reasons the idea of becoming an artist is so fraught with tension, even among the people who everyone else believes is an artist, they sometimes still wrestle with the question, am I a real artist? Why is that question so fraught with tension? And the answer is because to be a real artist, the main thing you have to do is surrender yourself to it. And the act of surrendering yourself means giving up a lot of other thoughts. Like whatever else you might have thought you were, becoming an artist is going to take up a huge amount of your energy. And there's no guarantee of social reward for what you do. Like maybe people will love it and maybe they won't love it. But to commit yourself to that kind of thing, that is a similar kind of emptying that I think Paul was talking about. And so I'm undergoing that right now. Okay, that actually makes sense. I guess I can be grateful. My job will remain to be the podcast host. And all I really have to do is make sure this community podcast goes out once a week. The Depth Mystic community survives in its social form. At least as podcast host, I've already done my job. That's true. I mean, making a video game is a very isolated laboratory in the Dark Tower kind of process. It's a very solo intensive process. And you might think our ministry would require a more social dimension. But becoming an artist and making a video game is almost going in the opposite direction. And that's basically why I've been so scared of it. At least you're taking a stand and made the issue rather clear. And we brought in Christian tradition to give us some depth mystical context, I guess, for like this particular instance of the emptying, the kenosis process. In this particular case, maybe you'll become a great artist and maybe your kenosis, your full surrender to that process will have been worth it. And maybe you'll just die in oblivion. Maybe you'll be working to the end of your days on this video game and in the end have nothing to show for it. That would be the worst case scenario. That makes sense why Kenosis would be the subject of the week if you're in this transition period where you're really surrendering yourself to that new identity. Thank you for your clear understanding of the situation. And now the only question is, what else is going on? Tell me about how it's going as podcast host. Well, I'm pretty proud. Like, I've only missed 1 week in the last 38 weeks. And I think that is a firm sign that whether or not society believes in our ministry, we certainly believe in it. Having a ministry is part of having a depth mystical initiation experience. And being able to interview you on a weekly basis and have you basically discuss all things related to that initiation is quite fun. And we're totally open to having more people from outside our small community engaging in dialogue. And we're hoping that the promotional manager, Zach Tolan, will come up with some way to, at minimum, let people know that we exist. And maybe even further, get people to actually engage with us, have conversations, be our guest, put our service to the test. But you're asking me how the podcast is going. Well, it's going so well that your chief concern now is your formidable new identity. I mean, the whole point of this podcast is to explore depth mysticism. And of course, to try to coordinate the community. But since nobody's ever heard of the term depth mystic until we invented it, the exact nature of the depth mystic community, from the public's point of view, is inscrutable. So is there anything else like we want to talk about for this week, though? Do you have any more questions or anything about, depth mysticism? The only topic I actually wanted to cover this week was that kenosis thing. Okay, well, I guess that'll be a short episode then. Let me know what you thought of episode 38. And if you want to engage in a dialogue, there's a Facebook group you can do that in, and a Discord server. Have a good week.